All right, great. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for joining us today on this webinar about telling your story. This really has to do with what we can do to try to answer reader questions, and especially when it comes to things like paywalls. And we're going to start today with just building trust and how we can help to do that by better telling our story. So with that, I am going to just get started. That's me from my high school yearbook, and just kidding. And I am Senior Director of Content, and with me today is Penny Reardon. She's Director of Digital Audience Engagement. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started on the agenda. Oh, but before I do, just in case you're joining us for the first time, we do mute everybody today, but if you have questions, drop them into the chat box, and we will either answer them during the webinar or by the end of the day today. So we'll get back to you if you do have questions. And with that, I will go ahead and start us on the agenda, which is, first of all, why do we need to tell our story better? Traditionally, I think we've just thought stories stand on their own. Hey, this is what we do. This is our work. But showing our work after the fact or as part of a bigger package is something that we can do, and we'll talk about ways to do that. Also, just understanding the types of reader feedback and kind of what to do with each of those. And then finally, we are going to show readers how we do our work, and we're going to just not a lot of examples in this one. In the next 15-minute segment for reporters, we'll have lots more examples, but we are going to introduce to you the editor of the Stockton Record, Don Blount, and he will talk about some things that they're doing in their newsroom. So just to give you some practical ideas of how you can help readers understand how you do how they tell their stories and what they're focusing on. So as I said before, we traditionally just let our work speak for itself. But for a few years now, even in Gatehouse, we've been talking about how we can tell our backstory, like what exactly we're doing. And the reason for that is so important today more than ever, because people are calling us the enemy of the people, and if people don't agree with what we've written, they call our work fake news. And, one of the things I thought when all of this first got started is that this would affect national websites, national news organizations more than local, because locally people know us, and so they would know that somebody is lying if they say, "Oh, you guys are doing fake news." But it turns out they are making those allegations against us locally. So this is really important for us to pay attention to. And the fact is that I think that one of the things we can really do is work to build trust among our readers. So this was some research that just came out recently. It was done in August, so it is really current, and it was written about recently in Nieman Lab. And you'll see on the slide that anything that's in yellow and underlined is a link that will work, and we're going to be sending this out to you after the fact. So if you wanted to look at that story and see what it's about, you can do that. So you can see here that there is, or maybe it's a little bit small, but hopefully you can see it, that there is no news organization that was a part of this survey that had over 50% of people saying that they trusted the news organizations. And this included, at the top of the list with 47% I think, is the Wall Street Journal. And then after that, you can see some broadcast news. In the middle, you can see a regional paper. The Chicago Tribune is maybe about in the mid-40s, all the way down to the most partisan websites, which are kind of InfoWars and the Daily Caller, that have very low, like around 22% people trusting them. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we can build trust, since clearly people don't necessarily know what to believe these days. And what do we do? How can we rebuild this trust that I think readers once had, especially in their local news organizations? We don't always write things that are pleasant, and the people have always had a little bit of antagonistic relationship with us. But even last year or 2 years ago, when we started talking about doing journalism with impact, one of the things we said was, we need to be the champions for our communities. We need to actually have them believe that we're on their side. And if there's like a triangle, and maybe there's on one point of the triangle it's government, on another side is us, and the other side is the community, we need to have that link with the community so that we are the voice of the people. And the more we can do that, that's not to say we only do favorable news at all, but that we absolutely are that we're defending them against maybe some bad government behavior. One of our states today, their mayor was just arrested for fraud. So everybody at the top of the list isn't always trustworthy, and that's why we're here to help them. So how do we do that? We talk about transparency. So really helping readers understand how you did your story is one of the ways that you can do that. Building relationships and engaging with readers. Some of that is in real life. That's what IRL is. And some of it is online, the online relationship, whether it's in social or in comments. And Penny's going to talk a little bit more about that. But first, another piece of research that was recently done is called the 32% Project. And this was done by, I can't remember, I think it was University of Oregon, but again, that link will take you to the research where 32% of people said they trusted news. And what the researchers did was it was a pretty small study. They talked to 54 people, but they really talked to them. It wasn't just a survey that people are doing online. And it was in 4 different communities around the nation. And people offered suggestions that they talked to rebuild trust. And the very first one was open the black box. So in other words, let us into your process. Tell us how you did the story. And then also the second thing was just journalists approaching their work as a more direct service to the community. So what we were talking about with that link to the community, that you guys are devoting time, money, and energy to building this relationship. And that's what's going to be so important to us, is the relationships we have with readers, with people who are consuming our video, with our photo galleries. If they're trusting us because they know us, because they know we're on their side. But man, we have to tell that story that we're doing it. So that's one of the things that people said, and so it basically backs that up. We need transparency, and we need to build those relationships. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Penny to talk about the types of reader questions and kind of, how you can deal with each. We'll do a lot more on that too in our session next week. But Penny, can you just talk about the different types of things that people are seeing a lot of?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jean. So when we think about trust and sort of how do we build that trust with our readers, or how do we respond to the questions of trust that come up, it comes through in reader questions. And we really can't treat all reader questions the same. We have to understand what they are, put them in different categories, and a lot of those trust issues come out in sort of the various ways readers sort of interact with us and ask us questions or offer feedback. So there's an organization called Gather that does a lot of work on engagement, and they actually did a training on this recently around reader questions. And in that training, they really categorized questions into these 4 buckets. So it could be complaints about user experience. The quote, "Your site is cancer," I believe actually came from a Reddit thread where a reader was complaining. Then, of course, they promptly copy and pasted the story text to get around the paywall. So you always have those questions and complaints about the paywall. Those seem to be never ending these days. Accusations of bias. That really gets back to that trust issue. And you digital editors in newsrooms, in most places, are on the front lines of this. So you're getting a lot of those questions in Facebook or Twitter on the site. And then a lot of questions about how you do your reporting. So despite, all the communication that we do with our readers, I still see a lot of questions that come through about, well, why did you use this anonymous source? Or why did you not have this piece of information? Or why are you withholding something? And we think our stories explain them all, but we don't always go back through and sort of offer a peek behind the curtain to really understand our reporting process. So you really have to respond to reader questions in different ways and not treat them all the same. So a good example of this, these are some screenshots. This is not from Gatehouse paper. This is actually from a newspaper in Colorado. But these Facebook comments probably don't look very different than yours. Here's a quote about cutting bias. And then here on the right is actually a really thoughtful response of the need for local news, sort of being transparent about their work. And this is a newsroom really digging in. They're responding. These are all conversations that are happening in the open. I often see when newsrooms actually do respond on questions like that, they get a lot of likes and hearts, so people are reading those things. So we'll dig more into some very specific examples on the Digital Cafe as far as canned responses and language that you can use if you're struggling with this. But with reader questions, oops, sorry, I thought we had a different order here. I think, Jean, we are back to you now.
Oh, actually, I think this one is you still. No.
Oh, yeah, I think we're missing a slide.
It's this way. Wait. There. This one. I don't think you talked about this one.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It was missing for me. We were reordering slides earlier, so it wasn't popping up. Okay. I think I see it now. Okay. So actually, this is a really good example from the Gaston Gazette. The link actually takes you to the Fayetteville Observer, but they picked up this editorial across the Carolina papers there. And one thing that you can really do with all of these reader questions and comments is write editorials on them. So this is an editorial written by the newsroom. Decency should guide Facebook posts and comments. So I think to help build that trust and relationship with our readers, we do need to dive in and respond. And there's some good language in here, which is really think twice. This is a public forum. Think about how your comments are going to add or contribute to the conversation. If they're not, don't do it. And I think if you ever have problems with moderation, having an editorial like this that you can reference and just drop in the comments is a good way to help moderate that conversation. Okay, now we're back on order and passing it over to you, Jean.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Penny. So one of the other things you can do with questions is use them to frame a story. So this is what Galesburg did. They had a really big story about a woman who was shot and killed outside after she left a bar, and it was kind of early in the morning on Easter morning. And it was a hugely popular story, and after about a week, they kept on hearing, basic just questions about the story. People just wanted to know, for example, was she a target? And it was the very first question they asked in this, and they got 11,000 more page views out of just doing this, 5 things to know about the killing. And it was just a way of answering reader questions. So it's definitely something that's thinking about doing that in a big story is a way of not just getting a bunch of page views, but also really answering reader questions and showing them you're their source. You're who they should come to when they want to know what's really going on in town, and not just gossip on some sort of Facebook page or something like that. So we're actually doing that. With that, we only have about 3 minutes left, but I do want to turn it over to Don. Don, are you with us to talk about what you've done in your newsroom?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me okay?
Go for it.
Okay.
Yes, you sound great.
I will talk quickly. One of the things that we've done in Stockton to try and give readers a view of what we've done or how we go about doing our work is this series, an occasional series called Inside the Newsroom. We do this both in print and an audio component as well, in which we try to explain to readers on certain stories why we went about reporting those stories. The 2 examples on the screen, one involved a older man who was accused of child molestation, and he got a really light sentence, so we looked at that. And the one picture is about a drag queen who did a story time at a local library, something which in our estimation, was very rare. So what we did was we had the reporters write about how those stories developed, how they happened, and why we decided to do it, and also why they wrote the stories in the manner that they did. The response has been interesting. We found that some people who are turned off by certain topics just will gloss over them or complain. Others have come to us and said, well, thanks for doing that. It helped me understand why you went about doing this. We just feel that it's part of our process in explaining to readers why we cover what we do. I think that Jean's earlier example of the triangle with government, the paper, and the community, we see that we need to have a continuous conversation with the community. I mean, I'll listen to virtually anyone as long as they're not profane, and we view this series as one of the ways that we can have a conversation with readers to say, this is what's going on in our newsroom, this is why we've done this. Hopefully it gives you some insight into how we go about doing what we do.
Sometimes I think I just changed the slide on you just to say that you do that in other ways too. In addition to having the reporters write about a story that they've done, you also use audio, right?
Right. I did mention that we do the audio, the print and audio component. Since we have our brand new podcasting equipment, one of the things that we do now, and we did this with this violent crime project, quickly we looked at crime and survivors of victims of crime, people who lost a loved one to violence, going back as far as about more than a dozen years. And then I sat down with reporters, and we did a podcast where we described the story and how we went about reporting that, how we approached these people, and the reaction that we received from the people who we interviewed. It was very interesting, and I think that what that helped readers to see is that violent crime isn't a one-time thing for family or those impacted by it. It's something that lingers. And in doing it through audio, we found that gives us another way to do this storytelling. We just, we look at print and we look at digital, and then this audio just gives us an additional tool that we can use to help explain to readers why we do what we do and allow them to sort of, just see our thinking, or in this case, hear our thinking.
Great, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, briefly. And
welcome.
I hope that, I hope you guys got something out of that. Don is always happy to talk about processes, so you can always reach out to him, too. And if you don't know how to get him, let me know, and I'll connect you. So thank you, Don. And with that, we're just going to wrap it up. Make sure you do sign up for our webinar next week, and we're going to launch right into our next webinar soon, which is, and also we'll be sending everything out, links to the video, links to the slides, and that'll be all out today. So thanks very much for joining us.